The high plains looked stitched together from wind-blown dust and hard light. In the mornings, it glittered on the creek stones like sifted flour. By midday, it turned the sky the color of tarnished tin, and by evening, it settled into the seams of every cabin wall. May Delphine had learned to read those changes as if they were weather signs on a preacher's face. Her homestead stood a mile off the wagon road, close enough to be seen by anyone riding through, far enough that no one could hear the arguments until the shouting was already done. A one-room cabin with a loft built from rough pine boards and chinking that cracked in thin, angry lines. A leaning well sweep that moaned when the wind shouldered it. A corral fence with one post bowed like a tired man. And acres of dry, honest earth that had been worked with hands that never stopped shaking unless they were doing work too heavy to keep trembling. May wore trousers and a felt hat because the world did not ask a woman for permission. It assumed she would either marry into safety or die in the dirt. She had tried plainness, once, when she had stepped off a train and into a life that smelled of coal smoke and wet leather. She had taken the simplest jobs, washing at the boarding house, mending for the widow who paid in coins that were too few to be kind. She had also seen how quickly a lonely woman became a target for talk, then a target for hands. So she became May in the ledger and Wesley Orrin in the fields. Wesley. That name had fit in the mouth like a swallowed oath, a man's name for a man's day. She did not like speaking it aloud, not because it was heavy, but because it reminded her how light she used to be when she believed the world could still be negotiated with manners. She had a way of working that made less noise than most men. She moved deliberately, as if any hurry might call attention from the wrong quarter. At sunrise, she hauled water and set beans to soak. At midday, she patched the roof, hammered fence nails, trimmed the thatch, and worked the garden rows behind the cabin where onions struggled with the dry soil. Love, if that word belonged to a life like hers, had always been an idea kept in a sealed tin box. She had never opened it, not even when a song drifted from town on Sundays and men laughed too loud at the saloon. She had never allowed herself the softness of imagining arms around her shoulders, because the softness always came with a price. But the railroad had found her anyway. It began with paper. One spring morning, when the wind was mild enough to pretend it meant peace, May found a broad-wrapped notice folded tight with twine and slid under her cabin door as if it had been thrown by a careful hand. The ink was black and precise. The language was official, clean, and merciless. She read it twice, then a third time with her thumb rubbing the words as if touch could make the letters less real. The railroad company, through its survey partners, claimed the right-of-way through lands that had been homesteaded, improved, and paid for. They would buy, they promised. They would compensate, they promised. They would also build, because promises did not stop tracks once men decided to lay them. May had a homestead deed, her deed, kept in a tin cache under the loft floorboard. It had taken years to earn, years that tasted like dust and sweat, and the bitterness of repeating your story to strangers who wanted to hear it like gossip. She kept the deed the way some folks kept scripture, close enough to find in the dark. When she saw the notice, she understood that paper could reach where bullets could not. The company's claim could turn her deed into a bargaining chip, and bargaining with a stranger with a government stamp meant losing at the start. That night, May sat with the lantern pulled low and her hands on the table's rough grain. She did not cry. She did not fold into despair the way women were supposed to. She counted the nails in the box and the matches and the sacks of flour, trying to make the world obey arithmetic. Then she went to the loft and pried up the loose board with a knife blade. The tin was there, the deed was there. It still felt solid in her hand, heavy with ink and signature. But she had seen enough to know that solid things could be stolen. In early summer, men arrived. 2 days after a squall tore the west canvas sheet that covered her drying rack, a survey party rode into the nearest draw, hooves stirring the powdery grit. May watched from behind the cottonwood trees, her breath held until it hurt. 3 men total. One with a notebook and a pencil like a knife, one with calipers and a strap over his shoulder, and one who seemed too young for this work and carried himself with a nervous grin. May could guess their purpose by the way they sat their horses, straight-backed, scanning the land like they could already see it broken into parcels. One of them carried a brass instrument that caught the light and threw it back, sharp enough to blink at. The oldest among them, Cal Rowan, dismounted with the confidence of someone who had never needed permission to take measurements. Cal Rowan's boots struck the ground with an impatience that matched the tapping of his pencil. He spoke to the others with a calm voice that did not seek agreement. He was the kind of man whose face did not ask for warmth. May did not step out. She stayed where shadows clung. She told herself she was only watching, only making sure they didn't wander too close. But in her chest, fear moved like a trapped animal. Wesley was her disguise, but her fence was real. Her calluses were real. Her hunger was real. The railroad did not care if a homesteader's hands were honest. She waited until the men left the draw. When their horses' hoofbeats faded, May crept back, carrying a rifle she had learned to handle before she had ever learned to write her full name in a proper school hand. She checked the distance from her cabin to the survey trail marks, then checked the distance again because she didn't trust her eyes. A line would be cut. That was what the notices meant. And lines, once cut, were hard to blur. The next week there came another rider, this one closer, slower, with a carefulness that felt like respect rather than threat. May saw him crest the hill and stop in the open, scanning the place as if he expected truth to be standing with her. Dust rolled off his coat like steam. He wasn't one of the survey men. His horse was fed well and he rode as if he knew the cost of every step. His hat brim shadowed his eyes. His jaw was set the way men set hammers before striking. May pressed her back to the cabin wall and listened. He dismounted at the edge of her yard. He didn't shout. He didn't call her out. He called to the empty air like he was speaking to a person already there. "Evening. I'm Marshal Oren's man. Wesley Oren, no relation to you, ma'am." May went stiff. The man had guessed the gender in her silence without seeing her face, or perhaps he had seen enough to feel it. She swallowed, throat dry as paper. Her disguise required silence that could be read as stubbornness. She forced herself to step out, not too fast, not too slow. "Marshal's business?" May asked, voice low and rough, the words practiced on her tongue until they sounded like something she had been born with. The rider looked her over. His eyes were hazel, catching the dim light like old coins. When he recognized her posture, how she held her shoulders, how her hands rested near the belt, his mouth tightened slightly. "Not exactly," he said, "but the marshal sent word. A deed's turned up in town, filed wrong, claimed wrong. Someone says it belongs to this quarter section." He didn't reach for his gun. That was the strangest relief. May kept her chin level. "My deed's in order." "Is it?" He took a slow step closer, stopping far enough that she could bolt if she had to. He looked at the porch boards, the sag in the fence rail, the fresh nail heads. He looked at the way the garden grew with intention. Then he looked at her hands. May's hands were the problem she could not fix. Even in men's shirts, the hands betrayed their work. She had learned to let calluses form so no one could question her ability, but calluses also made her fingers look too capable, too particular. He said, "You been doing the work, whoever you are." That line, simple as it was, felt like someone had seen through her coat. May didn't blink. "You come to accuse or to ask?" He hesitated. Then he reached into his saddlebag and drew out a narrow envelope sealed with wax. The seal bore a simple star. "Marshal Elias Oren," he said, name spoken like a fact he expected to be obeyed. "He says there's talk you're not Wesley Oren." May's stomach tightened. She had never claimed to be Wesley in town, not to anyone who could carry the story back. But there were always eyes, always ears. "The talk's wrong," May said. The marshal's man looked at her for a long moment. His gaze didn't soften, but it did shift, like a blade finding the edge of leather rather than flesh. "Then prove it," he said. He held out the envelope. May did not take it. "What's in it?" "Letters." He watched her as if he could see the words through the paper by the way she avoided it. "From town. From folks claiming they know your past. If you open it here, it might come to blood." May's mind raced. Past. She had cut the past into scraps to sew into a new life. She had thrown those scraps behind her as if they were fabric too rotten to reuse. "I don't need letters," she said. But her voice sounded too steady, like the steadiness of a woman hiding tremble. The marshal's man, Wesley Orrin, she realized with a jolt, for he bore the name she had borrowed, lowered his hand. "I'm not here to force you," he said. "I'm here because that railroad company's feeding men promises and men are greedy. Greedy men will take whatever looks like it can be taken. If they find something to turn your deed against you, they'll do it." May's heart hammered against ribs that felt too tight. "Cal Rowan," May said before she could stop herself. Wesley's eyes narrowed. "You know him?" May nodded once. "He rode past my trees last month, marked ground." "So," Wesley said quietly, "he's been sniffing." May's mouth went dry. "Marshall sent you because he thinks I'm a fraud?" Wesley stared at her, and for a moment she saw the impatience beneath his restraint, a man who had spent years dealing with violence that never asked permission. When he spoke, his words came measured. "He sent me because he believes your deed is real," Wesley said, "and because he believes you're not safe." May should have been angry. The accusation, even wrapped in concern, still stung. But anger was a luxury. She had learned hunger better than she learned it. "What do you want?" she asked. Wesley's gaze flicked to the loft above the cabin, where the hidden deed lay under a board. "I want you to sit down with the marshal's paper. I want you to show me the deed you say is in order, not to prove your identity to the world, only to keep it from being used against you." May's instincts screamed to refuse. Her instincts screamed that any showing of papers was a death sentence. But Wesley spoke like a man who had seen too many towns eat the vulnerable. May looked past him, to where the trail would bend around her property if men followed it from the draw. She imagined Cal Rowan's pencil making lines that would cut her into pieces. She imagined the railroad crew returning with hired muscle and a contract, with the law standing beside them like a lantern that never illuminates what it should. Then she imagined Wesley's face if she lied. She didn't know why that image felt heavier than fear itself. "Not here," May said. Wesley nodded once as if he expected that answer. "Then when?" May glanced at the sky where the light had begun to thin. "When the sun's low enough that nobody's watching." He stepped back. "I'll be gone by dusk. Don't go wandering. I ain't helping you by letting you get shot." The way he said shot, like it was an everyday possibility, made May's nerves hum. She watched him mount. His horse stamped once, impatient. Wesley gave her a look over the shoulder, then rode away down the slope. May waited until she could no longer hear hoofbeats. Only then did she go to the loft and lift the floorboard again. The deed gleamed with ink. She held it up to the lantern light and traced the signatures like a prayer. But there was something else now, a fear that did not belong to the railroad alone. Wesley Orrin had come too close. The star seal, the letters, the mention of her past, those weren't the railroad company's tricks. Those were personal. The letters would not just threaten the homestead, they would reveal the seam in her disguise. In the following days, May worked with an urgency that made her joints ache. She repaired the corral fence so the wind wouldn't take it in the night. She hauled boards for a lean-to shed behind the cabin. She stacked firewood in tighter bundles. The world around her did not slow because her fear required time. At dawn on the third day, she heard a knock at her door. Not a survey knock, not a random traveler's knock. The rhythm was steady, the kind of knock delivered by someone who believed he had a right to be heard. May froze with a hammer in her hand. She opened the door just wide enough to see. Cal Rowan stood in the light like he owned it. His hat brim was pulled low. His canvas coat was neat enough to suggest he bathed in whatever water he could find. In one gloved hand, he held a folder with papers clipped inside. "You got a visitor," Cal said. May kept her face neutral. "I ain't invited you." Cal smiled as if he'd heard that complaint from men twice his age. "You don't get to invite me on your own property no more. Not with the right-of-way in question." May's grip tightened around the hammer so hard her knuckles hurt. She set the hammer down slowly because she could not afford a sudden motion that looked like anger. "What do you want?" she asked. Cal shifted his folder. "I'm here to make arrangements. The company's willing to purchase. They prefer to purchase from people who can show clear title." May felt her stomach drop. Clear title. The word was a hook. "My title's clear," May said. Cal leaned a fraction closer. "Then you won't mind showing it." May's eyes went to the envelope Wesley had left behind. He had not left it. He had only warned. But May imagined it anyway, imagined how easy it would be to use the marshal's letters as a wedge. "Who told you to come?" May asked. Cal's smile sharpened. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me," May said. Cal glanced over May's shoulder toward the loft stairs. "It matters to me, too, because I don't like wasting time, and I don't like surprises." The way he said surprises made May's skin crawl. She stepped back into the cabin. "Come in if you're so confident." Cal followed her in, boots scraping dust off the threshold. He didn't remove his hat. That was either arrogance or habit. May moved to the table and set a cup of coffee down, though she hadn't made any. Her mind ran faster than her hands. The coffee was a prop, something to occupy the moment while she thought. Cal opened his folder. He didn't take out the title deed papers immediately. He took out a sheet of printed questions, the kind men used to pretend they were asking permission. "State your name," Cal said. May swallowed. "Wesley Oren." Cal's pencil hovered. "That's what you call yourself?" May kept her gaze steady. "That's my name." Cal didn't look up. "Then you won't mind signing a deposition that verifies it. The company will note it. It'll keep you safe when men come with machinery." May's heart lurched. Safe. Machinery didn't show mercy, but she understood the trap. If she signed, she would be putting her identity in writing. If she signed wrong, Cal would have a reason to question her deed. May set her jaw. "I won't sign without the marshal's presence." Cal finally looked up, and his eyes were darker than his voice. "Marshal's busy. Marshal don't ride out here for every man with a stubborn tongue." May's pulse rose. "You don't know what Marshal does." Cal's smile returned, but it was less friendly now. "I know what Marshal used to do. I know his kind." He said it like a challenge. May's thoughts snapped. Wesley wasn't the marshal's man anymore. Wesley Oren was the marshal's name in her life now. If Cal knew Wesley's habits, then Cal knew more than the railroad had any right to know. May forced her voice to stay even. "You and the marshal have met." Cal's gaze shifted to the loft, just briefly. It was a quick look, but May saw it. Cal said, "I've been closer than you think." May felt the room tilt. She had been careful. She had hidden her body from too many eyes. Yet the feeling that someone had been watching her long before Wesley rode up threatened her control. She moved, not toward the loft, but toward the stove as if to attend to a pot. Her mind calculated. If she reached the loft quickly enough, could she get the deed before Cal snatched her? But Cal's boots were near the table. He could grab, he could tear, and May's disguise was fragile enough without paper being pulled apart. Cal noticed her movement. He chuckled softly. "You reaching for something?" he asked. May turned her head just enough to show she'd heard. "No." But her lie was thin. Cal took a step closer. "Then show me the deed." May's breath caught. She didn't have the deed on her. It was in the tin cache. It was under the loft board. She could feel the decision coming, the moment when pretending would stop being possible. Wesley Oren had warned her. Don't let greedy men learn where you hide your truth. The knocking came again, harder this time. A horse shifted outside. Voices rose and fell, muffled by dust and distance. Cal froze, pen paused. May didn't wait to see who arrived. She turned toward the door and called out a man's voice she'd built over months. "Go on, who's there?" The answer was Wesley's voice. "Open up, Wesley, Cal Rowan's inside, ain't he?" May's lungs tightened. Wesley shouldn't know Cal was inside unless someone told him, unless Wesley had been watching too. But Wesley arrived with that kind of knowledge anyway, like he'd walked into a story he already understood. May stepped to the door and pulled it wider. Wesley Oren stood there with his hat in his hands, posture stiff with contained anger. His eyes went straight to Cal, then to May. In that instant, May felt all her careful actions become visible. The tightened collar, the way she held herself like a man to keep her body from betraying itself, the way she avoided looking directly at people when fear pressed too hard against her throat. Wesley's gaze moved to May's hands, then to her shirt. Not in a crude way, no, worse, in a measuring way. Like a lawman checking whether something is true. Cal's face tightened. "Marshal's in a mood. Didn't think you'd come out here personally." Wesley's expression stayed controlled. "I came because I couldn't let you strip a homestead on a technicality." Cal lifted his folder. "Technicality is what holds a man to his word." Wesley's eyes didn't leave Cal. "And it's what gets people killed when the word ain't theirs." May felt the air thicken. Somewhere a wind gust rattled the cabin eaves. Cal moved first. He tried to step past Wesley, reaching for May's table as if he could seize the deed before anyone looked too closely. Wesley blocked him with a simple shift of his shoulder. It wasn't a dramatic show. It was practiced restraint, the kind that comes from years of knowing violence is always the last option, until it isn't. Cal's gloved hand slapped Wesley's forearm. Wesley's jaw clenched, and his hand, quick as a trap, gripped Cal's wrist. Cal hissed, "You got no authority here." Wesley leaned in. "Marshal's authority ain't a badge on my belt. It's the fear you get when men remember you can't lie forever." May's heart pounded so hard she heard it between her ribs. Wesley turned his head slightly toward May, speaking without raising his voice. "You got the deed?" May should have nodded, but her body betrayed her with hesitation. Wesley's eyes narrowed. May realized the truth in a flash. Her silence had been too loud. Cal's mouth curved with satisfaction. "See?" he said. "He comes to rescue you and you still won't show what you owe." Wesley's gaze hardened. "Then we go to it." May felt her stomach drop again. "No!" Wesley's eyes shifted to her, and there, just for a heartbeat, was something like worry. He didn't question her like a prosecutor. He looked at her like a man trying to keep someone alive. "What's no mean?" he asked. May's hands trembled. She forced them flat against her sides. "It ain't safe to lift that floorboard with him in here." Cal scoffed. "You mean it ain't safe for you?" Wesley's body moved like he'd already decided. He reached into his coat and drew not a pistol, but a folded warrant, paper edged in official ink. He held it so Cal could see. "Railroad company claim is suspended until the marshal verifies title," Wesley said. "Cal Rowan, you will leave this property under escort if you value your future." Cal's eyes flicked to the warrant. His smile vanished. For a moment, May thought Cal would back down, but the frontier taught her that pride was stronger than reason. Cal's hand still held his folder, still held his papers like shields. Cal said, "Marshal Elias Oren will not want scandal." May stared. Wesley's name, Elias, had been spoken wrong. Cal had used it like he knew the marshal's private life. Wesley's face went pale with anger. "What do you know?" Cal's eyes slid to May again. "I know that a woman can wear trousers and still bleed when a bullet finds her." May's world narrowed to a single point, the space between Cal's mouth and the knowledge he wanted to spill. Wesley didn't draw his gun. He stepped in front of May, shielding her without thinking about whether it would make him look like a romantic fool. His voice stayed low, the way a man speaks when he's choosing the right kind of violence. "You say it again," Wesley told Cal, and I'll make you regret being born in the wrong county." May felt the urge to apologize, though she didn't know what for. Her disguise, her fear, her life built on borrowed angles. Cal's eyes shone. "You think you're protecting her?" he asked. "The depot's already got papers. The deed's already been filed." May's breath stopped. "Filed where?" Cal looked at her like she was finally giving him something he wanted. "Filed as stolen. Filed as fraudulent. Filed as if it never belonged to anyone at all." May staggered, though she kept her feet. Her mind flashed. The tin cash, the deed's weight, how it had felt solid. Cal continued, voice tightening. "So now the only thing between you and the company's claim is what you can prove, what you can show, what you can keep hidden. And you can't keep everything hidden forever, Wesley." Wesley's head turned slightly. "You don't know her. You know a rumor." Cal's lips curled. "Rumors are powerful. Paper's just rumor with a seal." Wesley turned his gaze to May. His expression wasn't pleading. It was asking for consent, a dangerous kind of respect. "What's in the tin under the loft?" he asked. May's throat tightened so hard it hurt. She could not keep doing this. She had survived on concealment, and concealment had finally been cornered. She stepped past Wesley, moving carefully so her body didn't wobble. She walked to the loft ladder. Cal watched her like a man watching a candle approach flame. May pried up the board with a trembling hand. The tin box lifted free. Her fingers slid over its lid, and she felt the metals chill like a warning. She pulled the deed out. Wesley stared at the deed in her hands. Cal leaned in. May held it out toward Wesley, then paused, because the deed wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the letters in the envelope Wesley had brought, the star seal, because those letters weren't about land. May's disguise would not fail from ink. It would fail from testimony. Wesley reached, but he didn't touch the deed yet. He glanced at her face, and this time he looked beyond her hat brim. Her hair, the way it fell loose despite her attempt to hide it under a men's cap. The softness she could never fully flatten. The truth in her posture when fear made her shoulders drop. Wesley's voice cracked slightly, barely enough to notice if you weren't watching for it. "You ain't Wesley," he said. May swallowed. "No." The admission tasted like iron. Cal laughed once, a short, sharp sound. "So it's true." May's eyes stung, but she did not cry. Tears were for women who had the luxury of being believed. Wesley looked at Cal, and something in him hardened into resolve. "I'm Marshal's kin," he said. "I know how these cases get handled. A woman alone with a stolen claim gets dragged through courtrooms and towns till she's no one left to pity." May's voice came out quieter than she intended. "I don't need pity." Wesley's gaze stayed on hers. "No, you need protection, and you need a law that don't break you in half." Cal's voice slid into the space between them. "If you let a woman keep it, the railroad'll win anyway. They got money for lawyers. They got men for witnesses." Wesley's hand finally touched the deed, careful, as if touching it would wake something dangerous. "Then I'll find witnesses that don't sell out for breakfast." Cal scoffed. "Who would testify for her? People in this draw don't even come by to buy her eggs." May's breath caught. She had been alone, yes, but she had also worked side by side with one neighbor, one person who had seen her grief and not asked her to explain. A memory returned. The widow she'd once washed clothes for, the woman who had smelled like tobacco and lavender, a woman who had taught May how to hold a ladle without spilling and how to hide a tremble. May had promised she'd never forget the kindness. Wesley followed May's eyes and understood. "You got someone," he said. May nodded once. "I got someone who owes me a favor." Cal's grin returned, thin. "And you think that'll matter to a railroad?" Wesley's voice turned firm. "It matters to me." May felt something shift then, something small but irreversible. Wesley had moved from caution to commitment, From duty to a kind of devotion that did not announce itself as romance. It looked like standing in front of a truth that could get you killed. May realized she had been acting all along as if love was a weakness. But Wesley's care wasn't soft. It was rigid with purpose. Cal still held his folder like it was loaded. "Put that deed down," Cal ordered. May's hands tightened on the paper. She didn't set it down. Instead, she stepped closer to Wesley until she could smell the cold sweat on his coat, fear and exertion, and the sharp tang of gun oil. She spoke to him, not to Cal. "If you keep this, they'll hunt me. They'll call me a liar. They'll call me a thief." Wesley's eyes stayed steady. "They already do, but now you got a marshal's warrant and the deed in my hands." May's mouth tightened. "You got the star seal, too?" Wesley nodded slowly. "Letters came with it." May's throat squeezed. "From who?" Wesley hesitated. The hesitation was a kind of confession. "From someone in town who knew your original name," he said. "From someone who said you died." May's heart stuttered. She hadn't expected anyone to still be alive who remembered her. Her past had been a burned house. She had assumed only ash remained. "Who?" May asked. Wesley's jaw tightened. "The name you used to answer to. The one you buried when you cut your hair short." May's hands trembled. "If you show me, I'll know who to hate." Wesley pulled the envelope from his coat and held it carefully, as if it might break. "You won't like it." May reached for it. The paper felt thinner than she remembered kindness being. She opened the seal. Inside was a letter written in a neat hand May did not recognize at first, until her eyes caught a specific flourish at the bottom, the way certain strokes leaned as if the writer had to steady their own heart. May read the first lines. Her breath came shallow. The letter was not from the widow, not from anyone she'd worked for. It was from someone with the voice of a family member, a voice that knew the angles of her childhood, knew the exact street where she'd last stood before boarding a train. And then May saw the name signed at the end. It was not an enemy. It was her brother's. May's knees almost gave. She gripped the table edge and forced the world back into place. Wesley watched her face, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" May's voice went small. "It's from my brother, Eli. Rowan." Cal's face snapped to hers like lightning hitting dry grass. Cal Rowan stepped forward, eyes wide for the first time. "Don't lie," he breathed. May stared at him. "Your name's Cal Rowan. Your partner's name's Cal. Your man, Eli Rowan." Cal shook his head, but his denial didn't land. It looked like a man reaching for a rope he had never tied. Wesley's voice turned sharp. "Cal Rowan, who are you?" Cal's hands tightened on his folder. "I'm the surveyor. I'm the man who marks the ground." May's mind pulled the threads together slowly, like she was stitching a torn seam. The way Cal had looked toward her loft stairs. The way his pencil had hovered like he already knew what he would find. The way he'd spoken of marshal scandals like he had once been part of them. The twist became clear in the worst possible way. Cal wasn't just a company man. He was a family enemy. May's brother had written from somewhere May had never heard from again. And Cal had used the letters, used the rumor of her death, used the theft claim to try to wrench the homestead from her hands. Why? Because the deed wasn't only land. It was what their family had promised May would inherit if she survived. Only May had survived by becoming someone else. May's voice steadied, not with courage, but with the cold certainty of a woman who finally sees the shape of the trap. "I didn't die," May said, "but you did." Cal's face went gray. "What'd you say?" May looked at him with a restrained fury. She didn't shout, she didn't flail. She held the letter like a piece of evidence in her own trial. "You told folks I was dead," May said. "You filed it. You fed it to town. You stood there with your pencil and made sure no one would believe me if I came back." Cal swallowed. "I didn't." Wesley stepped closer. "Then tell the truth now." Cal's eyes darted between May and Wesley. He looked like a man considering whether he could shoot his way out of a story. May remembered the rifle she kept by the wall. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. Her power wasn't in steel. It was in the deed and the letters and the warrant. But her body still braced. Survival was written into muscle. Cal's voice dropped. Your brother, Eli, he didn't die like they said, not fully. Not clean. May's throat tightened. What are you talking about? Cal shut his eyes briefly like he was reciting a confession he'd rehearsed. He got mixed up in company business, Cal said. He thought if he did the filings, if he made himself useful, he could keep the land safe. He promised me he could stop the railroad from cutting through. May heard the lie inside it. If someone promised safety, it meant he hadn't wanted to admit how desperate he really was. And then? Wesley demanded. Cal opened his eyes again. And then he disappeared. Or he ran. Folks said he turned outlaw. Folks said he stole money. Folks said you died. So I did what a brother does when he's scared. May's hands shook. You stole. Cal nodded once, miserable. I filed the claim. I leaned on papers. I made it look like the deed belonged to a dead woman who couldn't contest it. Wesley's jaw clenched. So you tried to steal your own kin's land. Cal's voice broke. I tried to keep the land from you. May's eyes narrowed. From me? Cal's gaze snapped to hers. From the railroad. From them hiring men to drag you out. From them putting you on a road to nowhere. May stared, stunned by the logic that had justified a crime. Wesley's eyes burned. That's not protection. That's theft with an excuse. May's chest rose and fell. She thought of her own years of labor, years when she had been alone and starving and determined. She thought of the deed's weight under the loft board. She understood then the subversion that hurt the most. She hadn't been hiding from strangers alone. She had been hiding from someone who claimed to love her. May held the letter higher and read a line again, her eyes catching on words about a promise made before trouble began. The letter ended with a request, an instruction for how to locate a second set of papers in town, a way to find the person who could confirm her homestead claim. It named Wesley Orrin. May's breath caught. Wesley turned his head. You're reading something that involves me? May looked up. It says, the marshal would know what to do. Wesley went still. Cal Rowan's face turned darker like he knew the outcome already. He shouldn't be in it, Cal said. Elias wasn't supposed to be involved. May felt her anger sharpen into a strange clarity. You mean you chose to believe the law could be bent? Cal's shoulders sagged. I chose to believe Elias would protect the land. May looked at Wesley then. The marshal's star seal. The careful way he had asked her to show the deed only to keep it from being used against her. Wesley didn't look like a man protecting something because he could. He looked like a man protecting something because it was right. May realized the twist that had been waiting under the surface all along. Wesley Orrin was not only arriving as law, he had been named in her brother's letter as the one who could legally restore her claim. Her disguise had been the only way she could survive long enough for the law to catch up. But her disguise would still have consequences. A woman claiming a deed while disguised risked a scandal, not just from Cal's accusations, but from the town's hungry gossip. May's world was fragile. She needed more than truth. She needed the kind of truth that could be heard. Wesley's voice softened slightly, and the restraint in it made it warmer than any confession. May. May flinched at her real name spoken aloud in a room full of paper. Wesley corrected himself quickly, but his eyes held hers like a promise. Your real name, anyway. I can keep the railroad from grabbing this land today, but tomorrow you gotta be willing to show what you are when the company's lawyers come. May swallowed. If I do, they'll punish me. Wesley's gaze hardened again. If you don't, they'll take it anyway. Choose what kind of suffering you can live with. Cal stared at Wesley as if surprised that the marshal's man would sound like a human being instead of a badge. May looked at Cal. She wanted to hate him completely, but hatred was too easy, too satisfying. She had seen the fear in Cal's eyes when he realized her past wasn't dead. Fear made men do ugly things. May stepped closer to Cal. She held the letter out toward him. "You wrote this with your guilt," she said, "and you still thought you could fix it by stealing my future." Cal's eyes filled. He didn't wipe his face. He looked like he wasn't sure tears were allowed. "I wanted you safe," he whispered. May's voice turned quiet. "You made me safe only for as long as your lies kept hold." Wesley's hand rested on the table near the deed, not touching May, but close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him. "You got someone in town who can verify the second set of papers?" Wesley asked. May nodded slowly. "Mrs. Barlow." Wesley's jaw tightened. "She'll testify." May didn't smile. "She'll also speak the truth about me, about why I had to hide." Wesley's gaze softened for a brief moment. "I'll stand with you." May heard the words and wanted to believe them. Yet she had lived too long with survival rules to trust comfort. So she asked the question that kept her anchored. "Why?" Wesley exhaled once through his nose. "Because I've seen too many women die by inches in towns that call it decency." May stared at him. The answer didn't sound romantic. It sounded like a man who had made decisions that cost him. Still, warmth rose under her ribs. The cabin felt smaller than it had before. Dust motes swam in the lantern light. The air smelled of wood smoke and coffee grounds and fear. Cal Rowan swallowed. He glanced at the door as if expecting men to come burst in at any moment. His folder looked heavier now. "You'll arrest me?" Cal asked Wesley. Wesley's voice stayed steady. "Not if you cooperate. You'll hand over those filings you made. You'll bring any other papers tied to the stolen claim. You'll tell the company to stand down until the marshal's hearing." Cal's face twisted. "They won't listen." "They will when the marshal's name rides into town," Wesley said. May watched Wesley's hands, how they were tense but controlled. She had always believed that only violent men held authority, but Wesley looked like someone who could hold a line without breaking it. A knock from outside shook the cabin door frame, men arriving with the sound of boots and nervous laughter. Wesley glanced toward the window. "Sheriff's deputies." "I sent for them." May's breath caught. She had not thought Wesley would bring help this fast. Wesley looked at May again. "You got a horse?" May nodded. The mare stood behind the corral with her ears pinned at the noises, her breath already hot. "She's stubborn." Wesley's mouth twitched. "All the best ones are." He reached into his saddlebag now and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, something he must have prepared for her. He held it without moving closer. "It's bread and jerky," Wesley said, "and a clean shirt." May stared at the shirt. Her throat tightened again. She had no idea he would bring clothing. She had not asked. The frontier taught you to expect nothing, and yet the kindness still hurt. "You'll need it for town," Wesley added. May's eyes flicked to Cal Rowan, then back to Wesley. "If I go to town, they'll stare." Wesley's gaze stayed on her. "Let them stare. Staring's cheaper than taking land." May's fingers curled around the edge of the shirt, feeling the soft fabric under cloth. She hadn't worn clean things in too long. The thought of being perceived, truly perceived, made her want to hide again. But the deed in her hands reminded her that hiding had brought her only to the edge of ruin. A decision formed inside her, quiet and firm. May slipped the deed into the tin box and shut the lid gently, as if she were putting a sleeping animal back in a cage. Then she reached for the clean shirt and held it close. "I'll go," May said. Wesley's expression didn't change wildly. He only nodded once, like that was all he needed to hear. Cal Rowan watched her with something like regret. "You'll destroy me." May looked at him. "No, I'm not the one who destroyed you. You did. But maybe you can start putting things back." Wesley opened the door and deputies filed in. The men were dusty and cautious, eyes moving over the cabin as if expecting it to be rigged with danger. When they saw Cal, their posture changed. One of the deputies recognized the star seal and went pale. Another recognized Cal and went still. Wesley's authority filled the room without needing to be loud. He spoke briefly. The right-of-way claim suspended, the deed verified, the stolen filings to be surrendered. Cal's face sagged as if the air had left him. May listened without interrupting, her hands holding the shirt like a shield. Then Wesley leaned closer to May, just enough that his words didn't have to carry. "You don't gotta speak fancy in court," he murmured. "You just gotta be there and tell the truth when it matters." May swallowed. "And if the truth gets me hanged?" Wesley's eyes didn't flinch. "Then I'll keep the marshal's men between you and the gallows. I won't promise they won't try, but I'll make sure they can't succeed easy." May stared at him, and for the first time in years, fear didn't feel like the only emotion in her chest. A strange, restrained hope rose beside it. They left at dusk. The ride was a lurching thing through darkening grassland. May kept her shoulders squared on the horse saddle, hat pulled low. She didn't let herself touch Wesley's side. She didn't let herself look too long at the way his coat sat on his frame. But every time the horse shifted, May felt the man's presence like a boundary line, solid, dependable. As they rode toward town, the sky filled with stars. The kind of sky that made you remember your insignificance, your debt to the world. May wondered what her brother had intended when he wrote to Wesley. Did he know Wesley would protect her? Did he trust him? Or did he trust the law even after watching it fail others? She thought of Cal Rowan's confession. He had been protecting land, protecting her, but he had done it in the worst way, by stealing her chance to live openly. May could not excuse that. Yet she could feel the shape of something in Cal's eyes that reminded her of the way fear looks when it wears love like a mask. They reached town under a thin veil of night. The streets were rough boards and packed dirt, lanterns swinging from porch posts. The air smelled of wood smoke, sweat, and coal. Horses stamped and snorted, and somewhere a dog barked like it could warn the whole world. At the edge of the square, they passed the boarding house where May had once scrubbed sheets. The windows reflected lantern light like trapped fireflies. May's hands tightened around the reins. Wesley dismounted first and helped her step down, not touching her waist, not making it a spectacle. He offered his hand to steady her, and May took it because her pride didn't outrank survival anymore. They walked into the marshal's office. Elias Oren wasn't there in person. The marshal had sent a deputy and a clerk. The clerk was young and nervous, ink-stained fingers trembling as he set papers on the desk. But Wesley was there, and the star seal made the room behave. May didn't speak much. She kept her eyes on the deed and the folder Cal Rowan produced under the deputy's careful watch. Cal's hands were shaky as he slid the documents across the desk. The clerk looked terrified, then steadied himself when Wesley spoke. Wesley's voice was low and firm, explaining the verification process, the suspension of the company's claim, the need for a hearing. May stood as quiet as a fence post. Then the hearing began. Mrs. Barlow, an older woman with a tired gaze, appeared from the back room. She recognized May immediately, despite the men's shirt, despite the hat. Her eyes filled with something like grief and relief at once. May's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how badly she needed someone to remember her as herself. Mrs. Barlow spoke in a voice that didn't try to be brave. "This land's been worked. I've seen it. I've been by. I know her hands. I know the work she did when she thought she'd be punished for being alone." The clerk wrote down every word as if it could stop the railroad. Cal Rowan tried to interrupt, then swallowed the impulse when Wesley's stare pinned him. When May finally stepped forward to answer questions, her voice came out steady enough to surprise her. She described the claim. She described the tin cash. She described the notice under her door. She did not say she was disguised because she was ashamed. She said it because she was not safe. She said it because women were treated as property even when they owned land with their own labor. The words were hard to shape, not because they were complicated, but because saying them meant admitting she had needed help. Wesley didn't interrupt. He didn't try to soften her into something easier to swallow. He let the truth come out as it was, rough, incomplete, human. When Cal's accusations were read, stolen deed claim, fraudulent identity claim, May watched Wesley's face closely. She expected him to look triumphant. Instead, he looked tired, like he knew the law would never fully repair the damage men could do with paper. Then Wesley produced the envelope of letters. The clerk unfolded the star-sealed note and read aloud the part that mattered. The brother's directive, the confirmation that the deed had been prepared for May's use, and the instruction that Wesley Orrin, Marshal Elias's kin, was to restore her title if she reached town. May's stomach turned with a grief she hadn't allowed herself. She hadn't known her brother's fate, and now she knew he had been alive long enough to set a path for her. That knowledge didn't fix him or make the years of loneliness less real, but it changed the way she held her anger. She wasn't only fighting the railroad, she was fighting the story that had tried to erase her. Wesley didn't smile at the outcome. He simply placed his palm flat on the desk next to May's deed. "Title restored pending hearing results," he said. "Company's claim suspended. Railroad survey marks to be removed until verified." The clerk nodded too quickly, as if the nod was a life preserver. The room filled with the sound of men shifting their boots, whispering behind hands. May felt eyes on her, a woman's eyes. Men's eyes, too. The kind of stares that could be curiosity or appetite. Wesley positioned himself slightly at her side, not blocking, not crowding, but close enough that the space around her felt less dangerous. For the first time, May let herself look at him without trying to pretend she was still Wesley. Wesley Orrin looked like a man who had spent his life practicing restraint. Yet his eyes held a tenderness he did not offer in words. It was in the way he kept his body angled toward her, in the way he listened instead of demanding. After the hearing outside in the square, the air smelled of wet dust and evening wood smoke. May stood near the hitch rail where horses breathed hot and irritated. Wesley stepped closer. "You kept the deed," he said. May nodded. "I couldn't let them take it." Wesley's gaze shifted to her hands. He didn't reach for them. He only stared long enough that she felt seen. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone," he said. May's voice came out quiet. "Maybe I still am." Wesley's expression tightened, and for a moment May thought he would argue. Instead, he took a breath as if deciding what kind of honesty he could afford. "I can't promise the railroad won't return," Wesley said. "They don't stop because of one paper, but I can promise something else." May waited. Wesley's eyes met hers. His voice dropped even lower, as if the wind might steal it. "I won't let them use your disguise against you again." May's heart made a painful leap. The twist of the day, her brother's letter, Cal Rowan's family betrayal, the marshal's warrant, had carried her to a point where she could either flee again or stay and accept that she might be loved by someone who understood danger. She did not know how to do love yet, but she knew how to do action. May reached up and adjusted the brim of Wesley's hat so it sat properly, the way she might have adjusted a tool before using it. It was small, but it was also intimate. Then she let her fingers rest for a heartbeat on his wrist, on the pulse she could feel. Wesley didn't pull away. He simply closed his hand over hers gently, as if he was afraid to startle a wild thing. May swallowed. "If the company comes back," she said, "they'll find us ready." Wesley's thumb stroked once over her knuckles, one restrained motion that felt like a promise without the words. "Then we'll make ready together," he said. It wasn't a vow spoken to a crowd. It was a choice made between two people under wide skies. That night, May returned to the homestead with Wesley and a small escort. Cal Rowan went with deputies to face charges, his folder heavier now with the weight of his own crimes. Mrs. Barlow rode ahead with supplies, muttering prayers like they were spells. At the homestead, May rebuilt the look of safety, not by hiding her truth this time, but by strengthening the place that held her life. Wesley helped hammer new braces into the fence, and May directed his hands with the same quiet authority she'd used on every nail. When the work ended, They sat by the fire. The flames snapped and sent sparks upward where the night swallowed them. May didn't talk much. Wesley didn't either. He simply handed her the clean shirt he had brought earlier, folded and neat, and helped her change into it as if it were a matter of dignity rather than conquest. When May stood in the doorway again, hair pinned back under her own hat, Wesley looked at her with a steady gaze that didn't need to prove anything. "I used the name Wesley," May admitted finally, her voice low. Wesley's eyes softened. "I knew the moment you stood in my path." May's breath caught. "Then why didn't you turn me away?" Wesley's jaw tightened as if the question tugged something old. "Because," he said, "you kept working when the world tried to erase you. Folks like you don't disappear, you just change coats." May stared into the firelight. Its glow turned his eyes gold for a moment, then dark again. She didn't say that she wanted to be his companion. She didn't say she wanted him to stay. She didn't have to. In the quiet aftermath of danger, May moved closer until the warmth of the fire filled the space between them, and Wesley shifted his shoulder so it offered her shelter. Their fingers met once, briefly, then remained linked. Not a dramatic gesture, but a practical one. Outside, the wind worked at the grass, worrying it like a question. Somewhere far off, the railroad men's tracks waited, not yet built, not yet finished. May knew the fight wasn't over. But for the first time in years, she also knew she wasn't alone on the line between survival and love. And when sleep finally took her, it wasn't into hiding. It was into a kind of shared safety, earned in dust and paper and hard hands, under the unblinking watch of the wide, beautiful sky.